All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next session. And here to introduce this session is our Executive Director, Tom Moran. Tom?
Hi, Laura. Good afternoon, folks. That's being resilient as part of doing virtual summits. This next session is always a favorite. This allows you to hear from states at the ground level of some of the issues, challenges, initiatives that are going on there. And to facilitate that is Persia Payne-Hurley. Persia is the private sector manager for the North Carolina Business Emergency Operations Center program. For those of you that know or may not know Persia, she is a force, passionate problem solver, and really wonderful gift of sense of humor and the ability to look at things in a way that is practical. I think that's probably because she has two teenagers and has been doing this a long time. Persia also leads our national state liaison working group. She's been sharing that as part of our fleet response working group for many years. So Persia, I'm going to introduce you. So help me welcome Persia Payne-Hurley. Persia.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Tom, for that introduction. I appreciate it. Yep, I am the mother of dragons. So, of course, you guys must know that that makes me inherently good at my job. I'm going to apologize to you in advance because, of course, because my neighbors know that I'm working from home, they decide they're going to grind stumps today. But we're going to power through like we do. So I am bringing you today the main event before the event. It's here. It's time for the famous, always popular state and local operational perspectives on regional resilience in the private sector, otherwise known as the directors panel. So you're in the perfect place to get a deep dive into the trenches on the way forward. And we're going to try to forge more operational relationships between private and public sectors. And that's before, during, after disasters. So I know you're excited. So as usual, we're going to be looking at private sector programs, business emergency operations centers, the lessons learned, innovations, cutting edge solutions, all those things that Tom mentioned. But first, as always, I like to clarify what we mean by private sector, because there's a lot of stuff going around out there. So for our slice of emergency management, private sector means corporate and industry business owners, operators, folks in private industry with interests across business sectors, primarily, but not limited to, operations, logistics, transportation, shipping, utilities, critical infrastructure, security, business continuity. Also, we're going to be talking about private sector high value locations that they're included, elements like supply chain, healthcare, data centers, the lifelines, of course, those adjacent essentials that send ripples into those primary components like the workforce, research and development. So we're talking about industries that include food, the growers, the packers, the restaurants, lodging, manufacturing, aviation, commercial real estate, EIEIO. So it's a big private sector world out there with implications for our citizens, families, and of course, the economic strength of any state. So I have the honor to open this year's directors panel, the most riveting, inspiring, hard-hitting panel. Well, maybe not the most, but certainly my favorite. And we're going to get inside their heads on the cutting edge. These are thought leaders coming your way. And so as we say down here in North Carolina, it's time to get your mind right. I promise you're going to love it. With past panels, we're going to continue to uphold the fine tradition of running before we walk, since there's really no such thing as walking before you run in our business. So we're going to run, jump right in, kick your shoes off, sit a spell. We're thrilled to get the party started, and we have 2 state directors and 1 county director hailing from great states. Please welcome Director Casey Tingle of Louisiana, who may have just brought some Cajun cuisine for snacking. Lieutenant Colonel retired Stephen McCraney of Mississippi. Thank you for your service, sir. And a crowd favorite, Bud Mertz, Director of Public Safety for Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. Gentlemen, welcome. The panel is yours. Do we have the directors? There they are. So let's go around the horn first. Give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little about you. And because we're close personal friends, tell us what you love most about your job and one little known superpower. I'm going to start with, let's see. I'm going to start with Colonel McCraney since he outranks me.
Well, being retired, I don't outrank anybody. So we'll start with there. Hey, I just want to thank you for inviting me to the panel and just letting me speak to what we're doing here in Mississippi. We are disaster rich, unfortunately. 30 federal declared disasters open. We're no stranger to it. Started for me personally in 2005. In Katrina. That's kind of what formatted everything that I'm doing now. So served in the military for a while in an all hazard response. And I'm so glad to hear resilience talking about it. It's the all hazard. You've got to be ready for any and everything at any time. And we definitely experienced that here lately. I never thought that I was going to be engaged in waterworks, trying to produce water for a city of 150,000 plus. And then another city which got their water from that water source, another 20,000. And how do you replace that and distribute it? So the resilience thereof of Mississippi, we were bending, but we did not break. And I can't tout enough. We had an opportunity to come to North Carolina with our first original BEOC member. And boy, did you do a great job on him. So here we are. I learned some valuable lessons. And one of my most valuable lessons that I learned was having the BEOC right under me. There's nobody between the executive director and the BEOC director here in Mississippi, because that's the authority that position has. And I think that's the most important thing you can do is speak with one voice, and there's not 2 or 3 people to get through. You've got direct access to me. And Todd DeMuth does a great job in that program. Takes it personal. He's been all over MEMA. He's been in probably 7 offices, and we don't have but 8. So bringing that in, the diversity there of knowing all those, I just can't thank him enough for taking on that great chore and continuing on. And it was our response and the business EEOC response during the Jackson water crisis. Would have never done it without them. All the things that you have in your tool chest, you count on every day during a normal response. We had to go outside that, and the BOC is definitely reflective of it. And superpower, empowering other people to be successful and letting them go, and then see where they will take that program and the passion that they've got.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Let's go to Bud next. Hi, Bud.
Well, greetings, good afternoon, I guess, or to most of us, looking across, I think it may be in the morning hours for some, but thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel, and quite distinguished panel, I might add. So yeah, I am Bud Mertz, and currently I serve, I've served 8 years as the Public Safety Director for Westmoreland County in Pennsylvania. It's a southwest corner of Pennsylvania. Have a population of about 355,000 people, got 65 municipalities that I work with, 118 fire departments, 28 EMS units, and about 33 different police departments that I have to work with and oversee. So part of my job as the emergency management director also oversees running the 911 center, which receives about 1,000 calls a day in our 911 center. Obviously, the first point in any emergency, when somebody's having the worst possible day of their life, they dial 911 and they talk to one of our TCOs or our dispatchers in order to get the proper response. Prior to working here, I spent 35 years with the state, 25 with the Pennsylvania State Police, and then I went over to the after 9/11, went over into the office of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security, and finished up my career as the Director of Operations for PEMA, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. During that time with PEMA, I did oversee 2 federally declared disasters as the state coordinating official that we had strike Pennsylvania within about 3 weeks of each other. Hurricane Irene came in August of 2011, and then followed by, within a few weeks after, followed by Tropical Storm Lee. And, we ended up looking at the numbers and probably had over 1,200 families that didn't have a home to go to, and numerous businesses out of the place. I retired in 2014 and was looking forward to a relationship with my lazy boy chair and remote control, and somehow got summoned into this position here. But I love it. When I took the job, I says, yeah, I'll give it a few years. But, you know, it's the people that makes the difference. You know, when you talk about emergency management, you talk about a topic that nobody knows. Everybody knows that a fire truck's red and got a red light and siren, and they put fires out. You talk about ambulances and giving CPR and all that. They know cops arrest bad guys, cops help people out, all that stuff. But nobody really knows about emergency management. And it's really unique to sit in a room and talk about community preparedness, because everybody's desperate for that information. It's something, you get that aha moment once you start talking about how important it is to be prepared before disaster strikes, because that only leads to a quicker recovery, and obviously a lot more comfort for the people involved. We've done a lot of good things here in Westmoreland County to counteract that as far as getting the message out. We have a position that is strictly community outreach. They go out and they give the song and dance, the dog and pony show, so to speak, on what being prepared means on the personal level. We also have a position in our county that deals with the access and functional needs outreach, in which they focus on those that probably need the help the most. If you think about it, and in my career in government, a lot of times people write plans thinking that everybody's 45 years old and has a car and can evacuate on their own. But in all honesty, when you look at every municipality or counties or states demographics, you look at maybe there's 55% that have some type of access and functional needs full time. Then you talk about the people that have gone through surgeries or other ailments that are on the recovery side, that could add another 10 to 15. Majority of the community has some type of access and functional needs, and that's where you need to develop your plans about. But most important is what we've done in the business side. I've always been part of PEMA's business EOC that they have, as far as helping them start developing. But when I took this position, I reached out to the Chamber of Commerce for Westmoreland County. And the first thing is I joined the membership. I had to pay for it out of my own pocket because, heaven forbid, that's like something new. Why would emergency management want to be members of the Chamber of Commerce? But since then, we've been actively involved in their meetings, and at every chance we get, we talked about business continuity and business preparedness, and even more important, we tried to talk to them about how important it is for them to make sure that their personnel, their employees, their staff is prepared at home, because being prepared at home gets them back to work quicker as well. So we try to push on an awful lot that we try to do here, and it's all on the outreach. I always said the best toolbox in an emergency manager's tool case is a handshake, because building those relationships is vital moving forward in ensuring that your community's prepared.
Thanks, Bud. I like that handshake, but I like that. And you didn't tell me your superpower, but I'm hoping you're going to tell me that, you're playing for the Eagles, this weekend.
Well, since the Steelers aren't in it, but no, I would have to, I do have to say, I go back to the handshake. It's the best tool, and it gives you superpowers. Building a relationship with your community is powerful.
Thank you, sir. I've certainly learned that. That's been my story. And I appreciate your words. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Casey Tingle. I haven't seen you in a long time, Director Tingle. I can't hear him. Anyone else here, Director Tingle?
No audio.
Well, we're gonna have one of Director Tingle's teenagers rush in and fix his audio because we know that they know all about tech. I'm
No,
gonna.
we can't. You can try dialing in by phone, Director Tingle.
How's that?
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect.
Okay,
Hi there.
let's try that. Sorry about that, Persia. Very good to see you and glad to participate. And thanks to the conference for the opportunity and the invite and for all the participants. I don't want to duplicate everything that Steve and Bud said, but so much of what they said is what I would say as well. I really appreciate the focus on people. There's a lot of things that we can get busy with in emergency management, from the plans that we write and update to the processes that we oversee, and certainly the programs that our public is looking at us to help implement, many of which are complicated and difficult to navigate in the best of times, and certainly even more so in the worst of times when they're most needed. But at the end of the day, we have to keep the focus on who's at the end of that, who's on the other side of that plan, who's on the other side of that program, and are we doing everything as an enterprise to engage them and help them? And Bud's discussion about access and functional needs, that could be language barriers, it could be physical barriers, for all of the reasons that he laid out and perhaps others. We can't assume that those that we are trying to serve understand the language that we speak and the processes that we work with in the same way that we do. I have a difficult time sometimes explaining to my kids what I do. So for the public to understand or to have a baseline understanding that puts them in a posture to be successful post-disaster, I think is a huge calling for all of us to help bring down some of those barriers and close some of those gaps, and just continue to work on that, and just to be people focused in everything that we do. If we've missed our audience, if we've missed, it doesn't matter how good our plan is or what our processes are if we've not connected to the people that we're intending to serve. And sometimes those are elected officials, sometimes those are nonprofit partners, houses of worship, certainly the business community, what we're going to talk a lot about today. But it's also sometimes the neighborhood, the subdivision, the part of town, the part of our state or community that doesn't have access to resources and information in the same way that others might. And so I appreciate Victoria and her comments talking about all hazards, not limiting ourselves to in Louisiana. We have lots of discussion about hurricanes. But we've passed out more water this year for freezes than we have for tropical events. I can tell you that for sure. And so what does it look like when the power's out? What does it look like when the water system is out? What does it look like when the roads are closed? All of those things bring us back to sort of first principles of emergency management and preparedness, and not focusing so much on what the hazard is, but talking about what the impacts of those things are, and imagining the scenarios, imagining the situations where a family will be in need and need to do something for themselves, and thinking through that ahead of time as much as possible, but not assuming that everybody has the same access or the same ability to do what it is that we're asking them to do, and to tailor our approach or message and resources appropriately. And at the end of the day, empowering our local partners, whether it's FEMA at the federal level and others, us at the state level. I appreciate Bud's participation here to bring a local presence. The farther you are away from the people that are impacted, the more difficult it is for you to be the one to address their challenges. And so empowering those local partners, getting to know them, finding out how we can best support them, I think those are important components that I would say as well. And I think if I had to land on a superpower Persia. I don't know what it would be. But at the end of the day, you want to make, you want there to be some safe, sane space in the midst of chaos. And I think that's what we try to bring to the table, is when everything else is flying around and going 100 miles an hour, allowing people a safe space to kind of, gather their bearings, get their traction and get back on with life as best we can. And in Louisiana, oftentimes that's very difficult. So that's what we've tried to do, and tried to provide for our local officials, for our public, and certainly all of our state partners and federal partners that embed with us here in the EOC, is to give them that space to do what they can do best.
Well, thank you, Director Tingle. You mentioned catastrophes, and I want to go there with my next question, and I'm going to start with you because I got you. Especially wanting to hear about your recovery efforts following Ian. But my question is the challenges that you faced, because Steve talked about that as Mississippi gets continual challenges. Your challenges in 2022, natural, man-made, however they, formed. Tell me about impacts to your state, any innovations or cool solutions that you developed, particularly working with the private sector, and give us a hint on Louisiana's recovery efforts from Ian.
Sure. So a few things there. One is 2022 has been a lot about recovery, as we've had, big hurricanes, Laura, Ida in the previous years, and communities that were broken and challenged from a variety of reasons. We've got a large school district in one of our coastal parishes. Every school facility was damaged by Hurricane Laura. And so as you think about what does that recovery look like, that is not something you snap your fingers and just go back to normal. There will be probably an entire class of students that go through a couple of their high schools without a normal gym facility to work out of and to play in and to do all of those things. And so recovery is really long-term, and 2022 was a lot about trying to expedite that recovery and get that recovery started in the midst of, severe weather threats of tornadoes and floods and that sort of thing. Fortunately, it was light on the hurricane side, and so we were able to support our friends over in Florida, as so many others did. I want to just highlight what we think is something that's been very helpful for us, is that following Hurricane Ida in 2021, we implemented a temporary sheltering program utilizing travel trailers, in addition to the FEMA housing program that they will run and execute as well. And our program, probably in about 3.5 months, housed 2,500 families in those units, which, if you're familiar with the FEMA program, and I'm not doing this as in any means to denigrate that program, it's much faster. It was much more robust and without much planning. And I want to highlight the way in which that worked, which really was a partnership with the private sector. When they figured out what our price point for travel trailers was, they found them from all over the United States and figured out the mechanism by which to buy them, have them ready. And as we would go through a regular procurement process every 2 or 3 weeks for another round of travel trailers, we were getting responses from a lot of companies that had already kind of figured out, and hopefully we were giving them information that was helpful for them to plan and to make sort of strategic investments as companies that would in turn help us. And so we went into that not knowing if we could buy 500 units. And at the end of the day, after about 6 months, we bought 5,000. And that was a purchasing staff that's relatively small, but leveraging the power of the private sector to help solve that problem, to help source the solutions, to help figure out the financing piece. And they made a lot of a very complicated process easy for us, utilizing the tools and capacity that they had that we could never replicate, as a state agency. So I think as we sort of look to that as something that was helpful for us, it's understanding what some consistent information and what some consistent expectations from the buyer, in this case, the state of Louisiana, that information, I think, was helpful to our private sectors to make the kinds of investments that ultimately shorten delivery times, increase throughput, and all of the things that they can do that we could not do. We were able to give them some information that helped them to scope and plan and to do that. The flip side of that is that when Kentucky had its tornado, when Kentucky had its flood, when Florida had Ian, we were able to take units that we had recovered from families that had moved out of them and then work with our partner states to help their housing missions by transferring some of our units to them and work state to state, not in a way to push the private sector out, but as a way to sort of jumpstart some of their programs and to work on those state to state partnerships. And so I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface for ways in which something like that, as an example, is something that we can help figure out. In my view, we have to be careful, certainly, not to communicate or provide information that gives an advantage to any particular vendor or put someone in a position to do something that's non-competitive in terms of a procurement. But more information to everybody up front will help our private sector partners understand better what our needs are and what they can do to address them. And so it is trying to create that balance where we're giving as widely as possible appropriate information, so that we're maintaining our credibility and integrity, that we're not picking and choosing winners and losers, but at the same time, allowing the private sector to do what they do in terms of capacity and throughput that we can't. And so I think those are a couple of successes. We've seen some success with some program management contracts that we procure at the state level that allow our local entities to better interface and hopefully access public assistance funds and hazard mitigation funds. That's not a mandatory thing. That's a completely voluntary thing. They can certainly procure their own contracts if that's what they want to do. But for a community that's been turned upside down, to immediately go into some sort of a procurement processes can be very difficult for them. And so having those contracts available at the state level for them to pull down on has been something that I think we've been mutually beneficial, and our private sector partners have been a huge help to us. And then the last thing that I would say is that we have tried to break our procurements down so that we are getting as many responses as we possibly can. Sometimes when you're going to implement a large program and you roll it all up into one large procurement, you're in effect choosing large companies that can take on both a response to that proposal as well as just the economic overhead and that sort of thing. We've tried to break our contracts down. It's a lot more work on the state side, but we've tried to break our contracts down so they are more easily accessible to smaller businesses, to local businesses. We can't give the kinds of preferences that sometimes we want, but sometimes we unintentionally cut them out because we've lumped everything together in such a large procurement that they can't be the prime on, or they can only have a piece of it. And so we've tried to scope our contracts and do as much as we could to spread the work out and have less large primes, more direct vendors. It can be a paperwork challenge, it can be a management challenge, but I think in the end, it's what we can do to better support the kinds of businesses that want to do the right thing, that are oftentimes local and may not have the capacity to go for the really big contracts. And so we've had some success with that. So I'll stop there, Persia, and certainly stand by for more questions and listen to what my partners have to say.
Oh, Director Chingle, that's a great story regarding the housing. I mean, it's probably one of the largest issues is, that we face as hurricane states. The housing mission is the big deal, and our federal partners try to help us with that. I know there's going to be some folks digging into your brain on that one. I'm already thinking about questions I've got about it. And the other thing is to include the small businesses. It's always a challenge to figure out how to include them, particularly those businesses that are community-based, that they are our Latino communities and our Asian communities and those folks that typically don't get as much of a chance, the mom and pops. So I'm going to be picking your brain on how we can spread that around, especially to the more underserved businesses. So, but I'm coming to you next on the 2022 challenges, impacts to your state, your county,
yeah.
and communities.
Well, yeah, thank you. I'll give you a different perspective on it because
Yes.
as my state partners could probably tell you, it is getting more and more difficult to get a federally declared disaster for any areas that you have. The algorithms and the formulas that you have to put together just about makes it impossible. So, but you know, what you don't see is, you know, when the federal troops don't come in, who's stuck to be doing all this work? Same work needs to be done at a smaller scale disaster, but there's no cavalry coming in that's going to save the day. You know, I used to make fun of there was a commercial on TV that had these people like filming a tornado that was going through wherever, and they're like, wow, look at that. And then the next thing you know, they get run over by the National Guard. You know, they get run off the road by the National Guard. And I'm sitting here thinking that just gives a false pretense of what exactly happens, because you have to focus on your locals first. They are going to be the first one there. You know, the 911 sirens are going to go off. Firemen are going to go to the fire hall, policemen, you know, ambulance, all that. Your local people are going to be that first responders that are going to be there. And a lot of times they're there for the entire disaster. In August of 2022, I had a strange storm just stall over top of Westmoreland County and dumped like 5 inches of rain over top of a mountaintop there in a very short period of time, which caused an extensive amount of flooding in just 2 municipalities. Was not eligible for any federally disasters, but I had 25 families without a home to go to. I had debris on roadways that needed cleared up, and we had, you know, it was a tremendous effect for our county. And like I said, the cavalry wasn't coming in there. This is where you build the partnerships before disaster happens to be able to respond to assist those people. A lot of initiatives that we had in the way is, you know, during the COVID disaster, we built a lot of great relationships with the human services committees in Westmoreland County, where we had to do an awful lot of outreach during COVID that allowed us to build a partnership. Then we took an existing human services committee and changed it to a human service and preparedness coalition, where we have, I bet you 28 to 30 different entities out there, nonprofits and for-profits and governmental and businesses and all that were all part of that human service coalition that now became that preparedness coalition. And we brought them together to help those people. Right after the disaster set up, we acquired a space with the local community college. We brought the disaster survivors in. And they went to a different spot, you know, different table, like a fair that you would go to. You would stop at a different table, and they would say what they had to offer. The survivors would say what they need, and it was a tremendous. They walked out of there with buckets. They walked out of there. The businesses pulled together. Restaurants pulled together, was giving them meal tickets to stop at the restaurant for free meals. You know, the lumber yards were there. We had lists of different contractors to help them out with their houses and all that stuff. You're not going to get the cavalry from the federal government, but you still have the same work to do. Building the partnerships, the relationships at the local level is vital, because it's more and more difficult to have a federally declared disaster, and that's where you need to be. you need to pull everybody together to come to the age, no matter what size of a disaster it is.
Oh, Bud, I appreciate that. I you're making me think of a sign that I had when I first started this job, a sign over my desk, handwritten, that said "Disasters without FEMA," but because it makes you think in a way that's outside of the box. And so I appreciate what you said. And with 65 municipalities under your jurisdiction, would you say that you know everybody? Because it sounds to me like you do.
I shake a lot of hands, but probably more important is that they know how to get a hold of me, and and we work together. We do more meetings and the superpower handshakes than anything, just pulling it together.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I'm coming to you, sir, Director McCaney. I'm coming to you on 2022. And I know you've got a bunch to tell us, and we definitely want to know, especially, what was at the heart, would you say, of your success with the water response for Jacksonville and the surrounding area?
2022 looks real good in my rearview mirror. That's going to be my announcement on that one. But both my cohorts here have hit on something that I've been the chief of staff. I was a deputy director, and then 2 years ago, the governor told me before COVID briefing is, by the way, you're the guy. Just want to let you know, and I'm gonna announce it today. And I'm like, well, okay. So you come up real quick with, well, what's your vision? We need to get that in writing. I said it's real simple, and I've heard it from my other two co-speakers here, and I'm gonna roll it up like this. This is my mantra. This is it. It's very short, but it's the most difficult thing I've ever tried to do, and that is people, people, and people. Now I'll give a little definition to the first one group of people. That's the workers that are here at MEMA. I've got to keep them. I've got to train them. I've got to have a legacy here that moves up. Us Katrina warriors that went and responded to, there's not as many as us around anymore. That is something that we've lost, is some legacy there. And that next group is going to be 83, the 82 counties of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, which live in 14 counties. Makes that a little complicated. And then the last group of people is every citizen living in the state of Mississippi, and even those traveling through. And I had that a few times where somebody drives into my storms. So that's something we got to take account of, not just your population, but anybody within your state. You've got to be able to respond to that. So Bud hit on it earlier. I think something we've turned on here in the state, which is great. The legislature has funded it for me over the past few years, and that is our disaster assistance repair program. We issue out funds to a county directly through a long-term recovery committee. Now, I've got about 3/4 of the counties, about 2/3, 3/4, that have got those committees online where we buy all the building supplies. I don't do labor, so that's where those volunteer groups come in, and we've been able to kind of lace that through. And I had a county ask for another spot of money yesterday, signed it just as quickly as I could to make that happen. And that goes back to that small disaster where there is no federal response because you can't meet the threshold. And that's a bad day when I have to tell legislators when they say, well, FEMA can do it. I said, well, they're not coming. We don't meet the threshold. So what do we do in the meantime? Now we've got the temporary housing and assistance program as well that they're funding through the state. So I said, we have to be ready on the state side to help the locals because they want to do it. It's all local. I've been a local, started at a city, worked for a county, worked for a state, worked for the feds. Now I'm back at the state, be it a county near you sometime later. So that perspective is right on spot. Bud said it. They're there the second that tornado hits or that flooding, and then we start mobilizing as a state to be ready to send those things in that are necessary to assist. But you never forget, it's that front door perspective. If you're not on somebody's front porch, you're not looking at how that impacts them, you have lost the war at the very first day. You can rebuild a bridge. It's uncomfortable to drive another 15 miles, but if you don't take care of people, you lost it. It's over. So we have some positions that we've created that manage and assist with that long-term recovery committee and our individual assistance area. They're constantly traveling the state. We have a disabled a person that actually, that's what they concentrate on, is all those people, the shut-ins, the ones that need power, the ones that need just to keep a cancer drug device working when they don't have power. If you don't make it personal, you're not going to be good in a response. But you listen to the locals and you go and visit them, like Bud said. I've got myself and my deputy. He leaves Friday. He goes out to see 3 or 4 counties, and I go and see 3 or 4, and we're just checking in. We're not checking on them, but we're just checking in with them. Hey, what else can we do? Give us something. And that's where the BEOC, the city of Jackson water response, as complicated as it was, broke down to, can you flush your toilet? Do you have water to drink? If you got water to drink and you can't flush your toilet, did we really respond correctly? Did we have everything that they needed? And guess what? To make the drinking water last longer, we took some of our COVID supplies, hand sanitizer, and issued that out at the same time. So just getting innovative to think through the 4th order effect, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. If you don't have a 4th order effect in your mind or in the framework, you're going to get blown out of the water with just one of them. So, we mobilized the National Guard, about 500 folks, did a great job. They came on board very quickly. We took the water stash that we had in our warehouse and immediately, within about 42 hours, started distributing water. And then the 359 18-wheelers came behind that. Well, where do you put them? How do you marshal that? And it was really almost like a Katrina type response to put out mega sites, then mini sites, and then where are your fire stations, because they're serving that local community to be able to respond to put out household, bringing all those into concept. And then Todd DeMuth and the BEOC, the coordination there for, hey, we've got 3 18-wheelers of water, where do you want them? Well, we work with our religious organizations and churches where they had their own distribution sites. I said, how much water can you push out? Because the government can't do it by itself. If you think you're going to go in and be a government response and be successful, no. And I think over the past 3 years, we've brought in the business emergency side where they get to look at our common operating picture right here with what we're doing. And then we create one within them. So those local businesses are even talking to each other. Hey, I need this. So another business helps another business get something back up for the community in a very short period of time. And it is a game changer. There is no doubt about it. You just don't sling 13 million bottles of water in about a 21-day period. And then I would say probably I did another third or half of that through the BEOC. So it is a force multiplier that we have really engaged, really embraced. And that's why I say it's so close to me in the department, because I started that out years ago, about 3 levels down from me, and it was not successful. And I'm like, every person that was down there, why aren't you doing more? Well, I have to go up through 3 people to get a decision made. And I just, no, this is not working anymore. You're going to be right here, right beside me. You speak for me out on the curb. Any meetings you have, if you say it, we're going to do it, period. Just empowering that person, giving them the authority and letting them make good things happen, because businesses are ready to move. This is not government. You don't have to wait 30 days on a contract or things of that nature. The businesses are ready to put their money where their mouth is. They're ready to get it back up, because as soon as you get the locals some semblance of where they were back up, that's why the businesses are there in the first place. That's how we get them to our state. So it's been a great privilege to see what that business community does. And you want to be pushed, invite a bunch of people to a BEOC meeting. They will push you out of your comfort zone and make you start working quick, fast, and in a hurry. But then again, it's all about that citizen. Go into them, get on their front porch. You see how quickly you can get them back to some normalcy. That's what makes me come to work every day. That's it.
No, you make a good point, sir. Absolutely. I mean, that symbiotic relationship between communities and business, especially from the local standpoint, Because I have no doubt that, that Bud could, because of his scope, that he could coordinate something even on a small level, a small incident very easily because of that symbiotic relationship.
Right.
If the community stands up, the businesses stand up, and it supports itself, and that bounce back happens faster. So,
Yeah. Casey hit on
absolutely.
something earlier I want to comment on. It was a great comment about contracts. Something we did, matter of fact, it's in the legislature right now. It ought to be passed in about 2 months. Is we are getting debris removal and monitoring at a state level contract for the entire state, all of our 9 districts. And as Casey said, the locals don't have to use it. And Bud talked about it. You don't have to use that contract, but it's there. It's already been purchased. It's gone through the long process of legal review and everything, because we kept just seeing that stumbling block. Well, I need to clean the streets. Well, let's do an emergency contract. Then another contract is not done, and then it's not reimbursable. Well, I've got some cities. If you tell them $500,000 is not reimbursable, that city's defunct. They don't have the funds to be able to do that. So we wanted to put up a safety net in the state that not mandating anything at all. And that's the first fight I had, was like, no, you don't have to, but it's going to be there to get you through that initiative. And it's going to be a contract. It's going to have vendors local that we want them to bid now, because locals need to get back to work too, even during recovery. You don't necessarily need the big mega vendor that may be out of state somewhere else. Mississippi would like to pick up our own stuff. We like to do it ourselves. And I think that's something to be cognizant of. But Casey nailed it, and knowing that I'm crossing my fingers right now that we might have that legislation come through. It's just going to be a great tool for the locals that just like buying a state vehicle, hey, it's on state contract, go get it. Boom, they don't have to do any bidding or anything. Debris removal, debris monitoring is going to be that same way. So I think that's going to be another added tool in that toolbox that Bud talked about. Is I might not need it today, but I still want that tool in the toolbox for later on.
I don't blame you. Absolutely. And hey, I want to move to something on the kind of towards the way forward. And I'm going to swing back to Director Tingle. Talk to me about Louisiana's outlook on private-public partnerships. You kind of hit on it before, and Steve just did. But tell me what you would like to see, what you need, and how the private sector can help you build greater resiliency in Louisiana. I want to give you that chance, and also how to get involved.
Well, thank you for that. I want to move maybe the conversation a little bit to the longer term, because we think of public-private partnerships, and rightly so, in the response phase, in what's going on in the heat of the battle. But one of the things that we've seen with these larger events that we've had recently is the needs of the private sector when it comes around to what's that community going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where in the fact that so much of this is interrelated. If the school system can't function in the way a school system needs to, in today's environment, a number of that population is going to leave and find jobs elsewhere, where the schools are put back together and the schools are functioning and that sort of thing. And what does that do to the private sector when you've got a significant exodus of workforce? And so I want to just come back to this idea that it is a partnership, but it's a partnership that's interrelated. It's not one-way communication, and sometimes it's not even two-way communication. It's more dynamic than that. And it's interrelated. There are things that the private sector can do, as Steve was mentioning, that we can't do, shouldn't do, and if we tried to do it, would make things worse. And a lot of times, the role there, particularly at a state level, is making the connection with where the resource is needed and where the resource exists, and then getting out of the way and allow that resource to change hands and move, and keeping the bureaucracy out of the way of a lot of that. Sometimes it's just simply sharing information. about where impacts are, about the nature of those impacts, what recovery from those impacts look like, and what resources are necessary to do that. And so sometimes it's just simply an information sharing. But what we're seeing as we enter the longer term recovery is that we need the business community, our private sector partners, to help support the recovery of these communities, because ultimately it's going to be something that's beneficial to them. And so that's where I think we're working a lot to try to figure out what that looks like, where government can be helpful in providing a platform or a foundation and information sharing, but not in the management of many of those resources and that sort of thing. I think that's a huge thing as we move forward. We're going to need to figure out where strategic investments come from for some of this work, and how that's mutually beneficial, and where beyond just the philanthropic desire of a particular private sector partner that that has a budget to do good. Certainly that's a wonderful thing, but if there are investments that ultimately impact their bottom line, to me that's more than just a philanthropic, that's a business related expense. How do we figure out when an infrastructure project is needed? Obviously there are taxing mechanisms and things like that, but how do we do public-private partnerships that figure out how to get those investments there? I think Victoria was touching a little bit on that in the previous discussion about how we get there. When we think about water systems, and I'm just going to give you Louisiana's context, you may go into a rural parish and there may be 15 different water systems that serve that parish. We had a tornado the other day, and two funny examples. One, the tornado went through a fairly rural community. And as I'm talking to the parish leadership about where their needs and gaps and that sort of thing, one of them was, well, that water system down the street, it only has 29 customers left. Well, how in the world is that something that is, there's no way that a water system can do what it needs to do as their customer base continues to shrink and shrink and shrink. And so leveraging some of the pandemic relief funds and ARPA and those sorts of things to make, sort of generational investments in water systems, but not just improving what they have, but in consolidating and shrinking the number and making them better connected to each other and more resilient, I think is something that we're seeing. And sometimes those are private entities that we have to work with. Sometimes they're municipally owned. And so we struggle sometimes because we get tripped up by the legal label that's on them. But at the end of the day, they're providing a service to the public, and we have to figure out our way around that. The second funny story from that tornado was, if you're going to have a tornado, and I'm not recommending it, by the way, but it's going to happen. If it happens, have it in a logging community, because I've never seen the streets and houses and trees moved as quickly as they were when the loggers went down the street and helped their neighbors out and cleaned up the community, took the wood back to the mill, and just did a tremendous job of cleaning up and doing that work. Not reimbursed, not paid, no side deals, anything like that, just for the good of their community and to be a good neighbor, did that. That speaks to me from the perspective of many of our communities have different industries or different economic drivers, and they're not the same community to community. And so understanding in that community where your strengths are, and oftentimes your strength is in your private sector partner. So figuring out what capabilities they bring to the table, and then figuring out what do they need in terms of information and sometimes permission. So sometimes it's the waiving of an ordinance or the waiving of of a weight and standard thing, whatever that is, having that opportunity to have that dialogue to figure out what can government do to better ease the process between who needs the resource and where the resource exists. And then our role is where that resource can't be reasonably obtained somewhere else in a helpful amount of time, having the kinds of contracts and things in place pre-event so that we know that we can execute and do that. So those are just a few of the things that I would pass along.
Oh, you know what, Casey, those are, no, the good stuff, because you're talking about we're talking about private-public partnerships, future, long-term, really building resiliency on a long-term partnership standpoint. And we can get into BRIC and that kind of thing, and we can talk about those opportunities there. But I wanted to bounce it to Bud on the way forward and what he'd like to see, because it seems to me, especially with all of the jurisdictions that you're operating in charge of, Bud, when you're talking about, to what Casey said, multiple groups, and maybe some have different needs and some have a smaller demand like this water, but combining some of those needs, especially in the face of the infrastructure bill and BRIC and those things, I don't know how you feel about it. How do we moving funds and how do we get those things paid for? I mean, what are you seeing in from the the grassroots standpoint?
Well, first of all, I think one of the good traits that we've always had with the All Hazards Consortium was it brought government leaders and business leaders together. And it was successful only because the two entities never talked before. And it's just crazy, no matter what size of a disaster you are, but even at a fairly declared disaster, you have to look at the fact that when you're running a state emergency operations center or a county emergency operations center, you have a whole bunch of people in that room trying to make the best decisions possible to respond to that emergency. But yet you have a whole business sector out there that does this stuff for a living. Back in the 2011 disasters that I mentioned earlier, Irene and Lee, I was in charge of food distribution with the MREs. And we set up our trucks and our distribution point in the parking lot of a grocery store. Who better to and then the grocery store, the person that ran the grocery store, we met afterwards at a meeting saying, like, I do that for a living. Why didn't you ask me? And it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street. We can go to them for help, and in return, going back to that EOC environment, we're sitting there, we're setting up teams to perform tasks. We're talking to our government leaders to create orders to restrict this or to do that or to do whatever. We're all doing this without the expertise of the people that actually do that work. If you're going to shut down transportation, why not talk to the trucking industry? If you're going to be handing out food, why not talk to the food industry? And that's what's important about it. These people do it for a living. I'm a government junkie, basically, that's making these decisions on their behalf, and that's going to affect them. So I think that's the important note to get. It's a two-way street. If you give them access to yourself and your agency, and they give you access to them and their entity, it's going to work out well. And that all starts with that handshake. Sorry to bring it back up again, but it all starts with that handshake, because you need the dialogue. You need to understand what each one can do for each other and operate that two-way street going forward.
No, but I think you're training me up on the handshake. I think you are. And Steve, your comments, sir, what would you like to see? What do you need? Your outlook on partnerships going forward.
So first, unmute myself. So now I've got it right. I think Bud and Casey and I are all kind of preaching the same thing, is that if you want to look at the new innovative thing in emergency management now, it's the business community. If you're not engaging them, you're way behind. You are a lap behind every day. You'll never catch up. And Bud hit the nail on the head. I had An industry called me just the other day when we were getting toward the last of our water response, and then someone else took it over. And I'm like, yeah, man, I gave him the keys to the plant last week. He said, well, I said, but I'm gonna give you the number of the guy that's running it now, because he's gonna need you. So passing that information, having that one person that had you gotta understand the pumps in Mississippi, they were like circa 1942. And the shafts on them back then were smaller than the shafts on the one now. So I had mill workers turning to specs off a 1942 draft of that stuff. So it wasn't on the shelf, and you couldn't put the news in because it's too big. So it was very interesting. But you know what? The business folks did it. Went to a local guy that ran a mill workshop. He said, "No, I can turn those. Not a problem. I'll make them for you." I'm like, well, who's going to rewire? Well, the guy over here rewires the motors. We'll get him to do it local. So I didn't ship anything out of state. We did it all right within about 15 miles of the impact, and the local businesses stepped up and did something big. And so, but to be able to just have the meeting today and pass that person off to the next event, or the person that's going to be working at passing, he's going to need your help. So he's going to be calling you because nobody stocks those parts from 1942 anymore. They're just not there. And I echo what this whole group is talking about at MEMA. It's been a journey for the last 3.5 years, watching the BEOC grow up. You talked about we're going to start this meeting running. Okay, we did, but I'm gonna tell you, we did some crawling, we did some laying around, and then we did some more crawling, and we got up, and now I think we're at the place is like, where's this going to go now? And the emergency management is everything. We talked about the red lights, the blue lights. Well, I want to run purple lights on my vehicle next time. I don't want red lights anymore. I want the combination of everything to bring it all aboard, and the spending time at the Chamber of Commerce. That is all the little things you can do just to lace that together, and going and spending time with my legislature this year. And that's something I've been talking to them about. And to see the aha moment when you tell them, here's who I'm engaging, and this is what they did for us during this response. And they're just like, what? Y'all didn't do that? No, I'm a coordinating agency. I tap on it, and everybody else plays an instrument. So I don't play any instruments at all. So it's to watch that go and to see how this is going to really morph is exciting, because government can't do it. Government is not, okay, the government's coming. We've all heard that. I mean, I've been at a lot of different levels of government, but I live in a town just south of the city of Jackson in 1,800 people. I'm in a small town, Mississippi. And so every day I stop at my local place before I stop somewhere else. And that's where you've got to make the impact. You don't make the impact at the local level, where those businesses are, where that private business is, you lost it. So I think the BEOC is the next thing that we are, and I am going to grow even further than where we are now. Todd's probably on the line going, uh-oh. I'm sure my guy that's running that area, but he's excited about it. I am, and I really think if you want an extra pack that has everything in it, engage a business operations center, bring those folks. They'll tell you what they want to get their communities back up and running, and the citizens will stand in line and clap for you. It'll be awesome.
No, well said, sir. Well said. And I've got two other questions, and we're going to go just a little faster, only because I've got about 5 questions in the chat because people want to get at all 3 of you. So first of all, I want to ask Casey, what keeps you up at night?
Well, it's hard to go fast on that because it's probably a long list, but I would say just to summarize a few things. One is we're continuing to see, and perhaps others are as well, limited resources at the local level. As we think through where response and recovery is best, it is best when it happens as close to the people that are impacted as possible. And that requires not just expectations and requirements on them, but it also requires resources to be provided to them and support to them. And that's one thing that we're trying to figure out as a state in Louisiana. How do we better do that? And ensure that as much as we are expecting our local partners to be able to do certain things for themselves in a timely manner and to have certain resources available, that they have the funding available to them to be able to do that. And so one of the things that sort of happened over time is their budgets all stayed the same. The requirements have continued to increase. And we've got parishes that have an emergency manager that also is the permit official, that is also, having other jobs within the parish. And it's not like in a disaster context, those other jobs stop. So it's not even a thing where they can just toggle one back and forth. They are, even in a disaster context, juggling those roles. And so figuring out how we best support the locals, because if the expectation is that the states will continue to do more and more, I just don't think that is the right model and fit. And so that's one of the things we're continuing to see, I think, probably with everybody else, the retirement and departure of experienced, well-skilled and well-trained staff, and having to think through what that workload looks like and how do we retain the staff that we have, but how do we do a better job of building the pipeline of recruitment? I think we've touched on it here a couple of times. When we say emergency management, that's not something that connects in the public's mind, and it's certainly not something that typically connects as a job opportunity that people should be thinking of. And yet, and maybe this is unique to Louisiana, but there are jobs everywhere in emergency management and in private sector as well in terms of disaster recovery. That's a wonderful pipeline that I think we need to figure out how do we better build and explain what we do and ensure that through our technical colleges and our four-year universities that we're building the pipeline to where those jobs are. And I think two last ones, Persia, just real quick. One is
Okay.
the continued slow pace of recovery programs and mitigation programs. We have to speed those up for the good of our community. And the growing insurance challenge, if you're not seeing it, we're certainly seeing it with insurance covering less and less and a growing uninsured gap. And even where there is insurance, the fact that insurance is taking longer and longer to pay and making it a more difficult process to get paid on your claim, which doesn't move the risk. The risk still sits there, and more of that risk is coming to us and our nonprofit partners to address. So I'll stop there, kind of a lightning round of things that are on my mind.
Well, I don't know how you're sleeping at all. I don't know why you're awake right now. I can't, that's tough. Bud, things keeping you awake, other than the things that Casey mentioned that, now I'm kind of, I'm wide awake now.
Well, I got to add to Casey that the local, we've built a mansion basically on a crumbling foundation, and that's our fire department. The recruitment and retention is poor. If you have volunteer fire companies, that's even poor. You can't get paramedics and EMTs anymore. I'm sorry, but there's so much built in the upper level governments to say about emergency management, but the true people who are going to be pulling that loved one out of a car that's got that's in floodwaters or that tornado hit and it's pulling people out of debris is going to be the local people. It's going to be the firemen, it's the policemen, it's the paramedics. And right now, that is our foundation, and it's crumbling away. And there has to be serious programs to be installed to make improvement there, because you can't build a big FEMA or even a state government when you don't have the locals to do the job that is truly needed. And that I can't say anything more aside from local preparedness is important.
Well, that sounds like something for the wish list here. I'm making a note of that. But so a stronger foundation. And Steve, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a moniker or a title to what Bud was talking about. It's the thinning of the front line.
Hmm.
If you don't have a front line, there is no initial response. I was that police officer of four on a force for a city at one time. I also served on the volunteer fire department. So when I was off, I had to respond to that. And to for the state of Mississippi, we have 182 people in MEMA. That's it. You say, oh, well, that's a lot. No, it's not. 83 counties. Really? And I only have 182 people? You know, and then you start breaking it down even smaller. Maybe a preparedness office of 25, maybe a mitigation office of maybe 18. We've got to start investing in the front line, getting those funds to the front line. And that's where I think the breakdown is that, oh, we've got this great program. Well, if I don't get it to you till 3 years later, you don't need it. You need it now. And I think the speed, FEMA's trying. I'm not going to say they're not, but when you come in and you tell me something's going to be eligible and then 6 months later you deny me, then I have to tell an applicant that he's denied and not going to get it. We need to streamline this process and get the funds where they need to be at the time they need to be there. Otherwise, we missed it.
Man, you guys, I mean, it's 2:05, that hour and 10 flew. And, you know, and as much as we've got a couple questions in the chat, I don't know that I have time to hit any of them. There's so much that just happened. Laura, I don't know if I have time even for one or two. Do I? Can I squeeze?
Yeah, I
one
think
or
we
two?
can squeeze one in if Miss Bean is okay with that. Our next speaker.
Awesome, awesome. Well, there's a couple for Casey. Let's see, Kathleen is asking, she says she loved that resilience event in your logging community. What town was that, Casey?
It was outside the town of Jonesboro, Louisiana, in Jackson Parish.
In Jackson Parish.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jonesboro, Louisiana.
Gotcha. And Steve, Francis asks, do you foresee the creation of resilience hubs to assist communities until the state can activate to assist? Do you see that?
Yeah, we started breaking things down regionally in the state, and that's kind of what I want, bite-sized pieces. So we're looking at everything we do in like a region 1, region 2, region 3 type concept, and that way they can concentrate on what the normal disasters are, but you always prepare for all hazards, and even the business communities kind of get those engraved into that local level. So I think that's going to be great. You asked me about my worst nightmare. That's going to be a New Madrid event, an earthquake in Mississippi. That's my, and I'll go lights out on that one. So,
All
I
right.
got a new bud in Pennsylvania now. Now I can say I got a bud in Pennsylvania.
Now you got a
Great to
bud.
have him on. Yeah.
And hey, Bud, and to the others, the question from Charlotte, how do we include people in the process? She's saying that who are not plugged into the world of emergency management. She's talking about a small business owner, community leader, concerned parent, and educator. It sounds like somebody may want to get involved.
Yeah, I have to say that every time that I sit in my office, I'm missing an opportunity to build a relationship. You have to be in the community. If you notice, I'm sitting here, I sort of got a BDU uniform on. I can walk in a room, the people understand where I'm from. You know, I go to the intermediate unit, the school district meetings. We go to the we walk into the senior high rises, and we talk to the management and the occupants in senior high rises. Right now, we're doing a program to teach young kids how to dial 911 and what questions they have to answer. And you have to be in the community. Charlotte is 100% correct. There's nothing established that somebody's going to show up to at a meeting, say, I want to be part of this. You got to be out there. You got to share your passion for emergency management so people can understand and want to be part of it. And that's the only way to do it is you got to go to them. They're not going to come to you.
Thanks so much to all of you. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I'm going to ask Laura to grab those so we can shoot them to the panelists. And, guys, every year, I try to be the genie of the lamp, and there was some good things that happened, but it doesn't sound like you're going to get that from me today. I know I did not have the answers on Super Bowl. It's just kind of, feathers and gold, and it's kind of mixed up right now. So I can't say for sure. But thank you, gentlemen, to all of you. It is always a pleasure to do this panel, and thanks to our audience. Please, if you would like more information on any one of these groups, their BEOCs and private sector programs, you can hit me or Laura Johnson, or we will stick it in the chat. Thank you.
So much to all of our panelists and to Persia, the moderator extraordinaire. We really appreciate the time and effort you put into this panel, and I love hearing from all of you. Thank you.